Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to Reading Aristotle's Politics. Today we are looking at chapter 6 of book 4, which we continued. Last chapter we did oligarchy. The previous chapter we did the parts and then democracy, the fivefold, the five forms of democracy. Now we did the account of oligarchy, which we had four forms of oligarchy, and now we're turning to six, which is in many ways is kind of a restatement of what happened before. So let's look at this and we'll do it. Okay, that there are this many kinds of democracy and oligarchies is evident from what is said. For necessary, either all the parts of the people, the Melzut, that have been spoken of share in the regime, or some do and some do not. So either all the parts of the people we've spoken of share in the regime, all the people, in other words, share in the regime, or some do and some do not. Right? This is the question: who do all participate? Some or not others? Now he goes. Now, when the farming element and those possessing a moderate amount of property have authority over the regime, they govern themselves in accordance with laws. For they have enough to live on as long as they work, but are unable to be at leisure, so they put the law in charge and assemble only for necessary assemblies. So that's the first democracy. So therefore, the first democracy here is a farming element, and they possess a moderate amount of property over all. Therefore, a moderate amount of property, and that they have this, and that they over the regime, and because they work, and those have enough, they have enough to do this. But then they're busy, and therefore they don't only come to assemblies. They establish law to rule that, and that that's the first democracy. The first democracy is kind of like the second democracy here. The first democracy here sounds more akin to the second democracy than the first democracy, right? As for others, it is open to them to take part as soon as they are in possession of the assessment defined by laws. Hence, it is open to all who possess the amount to take part. So, therefore, this first city, first democracy, it sounds like, again, very much the very second democracy in the first account. In general, it is oligarchic when it's not open to all to actually take part in office in spite of being full citizens, right? In other words, it's kind of oligarchic. But that it should be open to them to be at leisure is impossible unless there are revenues and monies. Right? They said, and here the text is meanings uncertain. I followed Denziner's, apart from his unnecessary supplement, rather than reconstruction of Raslo. But I suspect the Lucana following Tomen here at the end of B31, I have supplied what I take to be the sense. There would be little question about the terms of persi referring to state revenues. So again, this is this weird thing about this idea. There we go. I hate this movie. Um, so therefore, we have this interesting thing that there's this revenues and money. It's very difficult if you don't have revenues, state revenues, to pay people to be at leisure. It's going to be difficult. So therefore, they don't have the money to do this. Therefore, they use this idea that we office holders have to be at leisure, have enough wealth to be at leisure. So therefore, we have a property qualification. That's the first democracy. All of this is tied to the first democracy. And he says, even though it looks there is a kind of oligarchic aspect to here, that it does restrict that it's oligarchic when you don't allow all doing it, right? But it's still that this is the reason for this is that there's not enough revenue, right? This is practical reason. For these reasons, then, this is one kind of democracy. So, therefore, the first thing he discusses here is this. This sounds very similar to the second kind of democracy in the first account. Another kind arises through the next sort of distinction. So that another distinction. For it is possible for it to be open to all, unquestioned dissents, with respect to family to take part in the regime, but for those only actually to share who are able to be at leisure. Okay, so therefore you have to be at leisure again. Again, this is here's another thing that you have to have a leisure. Therefore, the respectable. So therefore, it's the respectable ones, the ones who this, and the respectability tied to maybe good family, and that may be wealth also. So therefore, there's idea they have to be at leisure. You have to be respectable, good families, unquestionable. So therefore, this sounds like in many ways, sounds like the second democracy to some degree, right? It sounds like the second democracy, where it's okay, everyone can do it, but it's more tied to those going to hold office must be unquestioned things, and they must also have some wealth, so that they're able to decide and able at that, but they're not going to be held for offices. Okay, right? Um, so that's that. Hence, in a democracy of this sort, the law rules on account of there not being a revenue. Okay, right? Again, there's not enough revenue. There's not enough revenue to pay for everyone to be at leisure. A third kind is when it's open to all who are free persons to take part in the regime, but they do not actually take part for the reason just mentioned. There's no money, they don't have time, they have other things, they have to work and they can't do it, but they're all able to do it. So in this one, the law necessary rules. Why is the law seems to rule in each one of these cases is because that there's no wealth, that there's not excess wealth in the city, money, excess money to and the citizens have to, that everyone really has to spend more of their time taking care. If you don't have the wealth and leisure on your own, you have to get it, sustain it, and there's no revenues in the city that will allow everyone to be at leisure. Okay. Now the fourth kind of democracy is the one that was said that was last to arise in the city. So therefore, it's last because it's the last to arise in cities. In other words, it's last in terms of a sequence of its coming to be, right? On account of cities having become much larger than they originally were and having available abundant sources of revenues, all take part in the regime on account of the preeminence of the multitude, and all share and engage politics. And even the poor are able to be at leisure, though receiving pay. So the fourth kind here is a very interesting situation. It's the last to occur in the development of this. But what happens here is that everyone can participate. So it's like the fourth, it's like the fourth one and the other one, but here the fourth one is last, and they because and it says and he says, but here even the poor are able to be at leisure through receiving pay. The multitude of this sort is indeed particularly at leisure. The care of their private affairs is in no way obstacle for them. And while it is an obstacle for the wealthy, because they make more, they need their wealth is that, and they have to address on that there, so that the latter frequently do not share in the assembly or adjudicate. So what happens? That the city is paying for the citizens to go to the city. The poor go. The poor can now the poor have money to go to things, but the wealthy, because their wealth is tied to their labor and their business activities, can't always give up their business activities to go deal with. Therefore, the wealthy don't participate, and therefore the poor dominate in terms of do not share in assemblies or adjudication. Hence, the regime of the poor comes to have authority over the regime, not the laws. So this last democracy turns into this fourth one turns to be the last, and it becomes the last in that, even though it's, in other words, the this is weird that the it sounds like the third because all can participate, but it's really because of the economic reality that the wealthy have to pay more attention to their means. They have more to lose, and I can't. And the money that's being paid by the city doesn't really recover the loss of their things, so they don't really participate, and therefore the poor dominate the judicate the assemblies and hence the deliberation and the selection of officers, and and therefore it becomes the rule of the poor. And with the rule of the many poor will simply demand what they want, and that their will dominate rather than the law. So what's interesting here is that what moderates the people is being at labor and not having too much money. If the multitude does not have excessive wealth, there's not excessive wealth in the city, then the city will be moderated. But the second there's excessive wealth, and that wealth can be given to allow the poor to participate, then the city will not be moderated. The poor will dominate, and the poor will demand that their will be followed, and therefore the laws are put aside, right? And therefore it becomes the last. He says the kinds of democracy then are such, and so many on account of these necessities. In other words, the necessity of revenue, right? The revenue of doing it. And let's take it part of this. In many ways, he suggests that what is the fourth original in the first account. The first is the second in the two accounts. The fourth is the fourth, but there's no fifth. The fifth and the fourth collapse into one. And the first democracy disappears. It's utterly not talked about. And remember, this is the first democracy. The first democracy here echoes the second, which is the second one echoed the first oligarchy. So therefore, this new first democracy, this first farming democracy, will have a similarity to the first oligarchy, right? We'll see this. So the kinds of democracy then are such, and so many on account of these necessities. So therefore, what for the rich in chapter 4 there was 5. In chapter 6 there's 4 democracies, and we discussed this already, right? Now we're going to talk about as for the kind of oligarchies when the amount of number of persons who own property, but is lesser amount and not overly much. Then this is the first kind of oligarchy. So it's everyone owns property, and it's not much property, but everyone owns it. So therefore, this is very similar to the first democracy in that sense, right? Or the first democracy that's here, or the second democracy in book book 4, chapter 4, right? In 4:4, it's the second. In 4:6, it's the first. And now, therefore, this new oligarchy, the first oligarchy here, the oligarchy, is kind of like that, right? He says that this is the first kind of oligarchy, that it's a large number of persons owning property, but the lesser amount and not overly much. Taking part of the regime, they make open to those who possess the amount of this assessment. So there's an assessment, and as long as you own property, you can participate, right? And that there is a multitude of persons taking part in the governing body. The putumata is like this. And not human beings, but law necessary as authority. Again, this is very much similar to, but there he mentions law, right? For the further removed they are from monarchy, for the further they removed are from monarchy, and have neither so much property that they can be at leisure without concerning themselves with it, nor so little that they must be sustained by the city. They will necessarily claim to merit having the laws rule for them rather than ruling themselves. So therefore, this idea that wealth, excessive wealth, they have enough wealth that they're able to, but not excessively. And that therefore he ties the idea that the rule of law, in other words, wealth here, what destroys law in that is that the people are free from leisure, the poor are no longer kind of restrained. That the wealth of the city's wealth, gives them the freedom to do what they want. And they have the power now. right? And that's what, and therefore the laws get set aside. Here, he's saying that the oligarchs, when they have enough wealth that they have enough wealth, but not too excessive, and this is why they let the laws rule. In other words, that it's they have wealth but not in excess of it, and that this would moderate the lack of an excess is why they let the laws rule here, right? This is what he says here, right? He says, in other words, they have not they nor so little that they must be sustained by the city. So therefore, like this, they will necessarily claim to merit having the laws rule for them rather than ruling themselves. Now, when those who own property are fewer than those mentioned, so therefore the property owners shrink. So here's larger. The property owners are a larger amount, echoing the first democracy. But now the property, those who own property decline. So the second oligarchy is it's a smaller size of people who possess wealth than those mentioned earlier, and the properties greater. So it's fewer who own, and the sizes of their properties are greater. The second kind of oligarchy arises. Being more influential, they claim to merit aggrandizement for themselves. Hence, they themselves elect from others those who are to enter government. They elect, they decide, but they are not yet strong enough to rule without law. They make a law of this sort. In other words, now 34 is a very interesting text. It says that can you read it? They make law a thing of this sort, the ruling authority, right? They make the law a thing of this sort, a ruling authority. So in other words, it is a kind of double-sided thing here. That the second one is that they make a law of this sort, or they make the law the thing that governs for them, right? The ending of this text is kind of can be read two ways. He reads it this way, but he also suggests the note there. So what is it? They're not strong enough that they can rule out law, and therefore they use law as a means of ruling them. Ruling, okay. And I think this is the point. But this is about the wealth. They don't have enough wealth and power that they can just simply ignore the law. They need the law. They need the law still. But it's the size of the body. There's a double side effect. The amount of people who own properties decrease, and the sizes of the properties increase. Right. So it's therefore the wealth increases in that sense. Right. And they aggrandize themselves to decide they are the ones who decide who gets to hold the offices. Now, again, this echoes that point. If they let, if they opt to let, and they pick better people, they let people outside of that clique do this. That's kind of aristocratic. But this is what he says in uh, uh, earlier, right? This is a point that he mentions. And if it's only oligarchy, then it's oligarchy. If only those who that this is what he says in the earlier chapter. But I think this is true here also, right? So therefore, the second oligarchy is the smaller property, and that. Now the third, he says, dies. In other words, but being more influential. In other words, okay, being more influential, they claim to merit aggrandizement for themselves, um, and elect themselves from others who are to enter the governing body, the plutuma. And they're not, in other words, they're not strong enough. The governing body is the plutumina, so therefore they appoint those from themselves, or they elect from others who are to be the governing body. So therefore, again, that's where I said that if they elect from their own clique, that's oligarchic. If they elect people outside of the selecting body, that's aristocratic, right? That's what he says earlier. But now he says, in other words, again, this is where I ended last time about they're not strong enough to rule without law, right? If they tighten it by being fewer and having larger properties, So they get even more restrictive, and the properties get bigger and bigger. The third advance in oligarchy occurs. That's where the offices are in their own hands, in accordance with a law requiring that the deceased be inherited by sons. Whoa! So it's in this third case where you get this idea of succession of sons, right? This idea that this succession of sons, which echoes again the third case of oligarchy in there, right? That son succeeds father. When they tighten it excessively with respect to their properties and to the extent of their friendships, this sort of rule of the dynasty, the powerful, is close to monarchy, and human beings rule rather than law. So, wait a minute. This is the third here, right? They, in other words, that um, that all of a sudden, when they tighten even further, okay, this is the next thing. They tighten they succeed very fun, but when they tighten, this is where the fourth. See that he mentions this, then he says this is the fourth oligarchy. So therefore, he doesn't hint that this is the fourth. You notice that this third one, as it tightens in extent to their properties and in extent to their friendships, who they will associate with, who they participate with, who they will associate. In other words, they'll associate with their own kind. They'll associate like this. They won't associate with the others, right? And only those within their clique. It becomes a smaller group, and that they tend, and they become so. And this is the dynasty, the dynastic. This is powerful. It's close, and it becomes this rule becomes that, and they're powerful enough, and they act monarchically. They act they act as one, as a ruling body, and therefore they act monarchically without law. And human beings rule rather than law. And therefore that clique, will rule like law, and rather than law. This is fourth kind of oligarchy, the counterpart to the final kind of democracy. Now, this is it's tyrannical. In other words, the last oligarchy is like as tyrannical as the last democracy. So notice that we're going to stop here, but we're going to look at this for a second. I will talk about this. That all of a sudden in 6.6, there's four kinds of democracy, but the four oligarchies. The four oligarchies repeat perfectly the account in chapter 5, except he adds a little points of elaboration. There, it's the wealth, too much wealth. Too much wealth destroys it. And actually, too much, his whole argument is that wealth seems to be excessive wealth. It has a corrosive effect on the moderation, letting the law rule you. The law is a moderating force, restraining force. That once you have wealth and power, you don't want to be restrained anymore. So when the people are wealthy, the poor have enough wealth that the poor can be given leisure, that this creates the people ruling and wishing to exercise power over the regime to give themselves more wealth and more comfort, and therefore they rule like a monarch, and therefore they rule out law because they act with no restraint. The oligarchy does the same thing. The dynastic oligarchy. The dynastic oligarchy, it's dynastic in the first sense, but it's also more radically dynastic because it's restrictive and that it's so powerful that it does not need law. And therefore, this is how the last oligarchy and the last democracy are kind of simultaneous. Again, what's interesting is how the fourth the fourth democracy echoes the fourth democracy in the first account, but not the fourth democracy in chapter 6 echoes the fourth democracy in that, but it collapses the fourth and the fifth. So it becomes the fourth democracy like this, but he expands the idea of in other words, the first democracy is left. The second democracy is the first democracy. He adds a second and third, and which is interesting that by moving this, the 1, 2, 3, 4, but the fourth, it's 4 and 4, but there's something weird here. There is something going on in that sense. that the first disappears at 4-4, but the really the fourth democracy in the fifth account echoes the fourth democracy there. It's all rule, but he asserts that once all he asserts that when all rule and there's money involved and that they have leisure to rule participate. The reason why they don't have the reason why the other regime doesn't have the first account in chapter 5 doesn't have um, uh, uh, the people. They just don't have time to do it. There's no means. There's no revenue for them to be at least. They're eligible to, but they don't have the means, and because they don't have the means, and there's not revenue to pay for that. That's the absence of revenue gives moderation. It's when the revenue is there and that the people are can be given that revenue. They're paid to attend and paid to participate. This is what it brings the poor, and the poor have and they lack moderation. The a priori, this group may lack moderation, and they are like their image. They're very in other words, the poor and the rich are kind of mirror images of themselves in regards to moderation. Not mirror, but opposites. But at the same time, similar. They both want to command. They both, when they have the power, they want to abuse it like this, and that's why he says that what he says there. So let's stop here at this point. If you have any questions, please. Uh, um, we've looked at the varieties of democracy and oligarchy. He's restated them in chapter 6. If you have any questions or comments, please put them below, and I will, when I see them, I will respond to them. Comments or questions about the text or about things. If you've liked it, like it, and pass it on to a friend. Send it to social media. Encourage others. If you didn't like it, you can say no and say why, please. Explain, and maybe I learned something. Okay? Another thing is you can follow me on social media. Okay, I forgot the point. If you have not subscribed, do subscribe. You can encourage a friend to subscribe. You get notifications, of course, yes. But also, I want to grow the channel some more so that we can hopefully get enough people that we get monetized. 2,000, but not near that. Um, um, you can follow me on social media, links below. If you want to help the channel grow and help me do this, because it's costing money now because of the way YouTube is operating. Because I'm big enough. My videos are the amount of videos are past my minimum free deadline, and now I'm over the stage where soon I have to. If I don't, I pay. I put money into it, and but if you want to help, you can help. Do subscribe, star a Patreon number below. I understand you're going to say, well, you don't do anything for us. You don't have encouragements to this. Well, if you build it, I will do something. There's people there and they want you to do something. I'll do something for them. But why build something if it's not going to? Why even have incentives? I'm doing this anyways. I'm not going to say. I'm not going to be like packaging this and selling this. Okay? I'm not going to. I don't want to do that. It's kind of silly. Who knows it? Um, I understand why people do it in that sense. I know, but I'm just trying to put this out there for people's benefit. So that's how you can help. You can do this. Another way you can help is to buy my book by Lulu. This is not a commentary on Aristotle's politics. I have other books to that, and we're currently writing on my next book as well, doing articles to produce the next book. But this is a kind of a workbook. This is a study guide workbook on Aristotle's politics. No book on Aristotle's politics or workbook. This purpose is kind of like not a commentary. It's not a summary. It's a study aid when you're looking. It's like Cliff's Notes, but it's chapter book by book, chapter by chapter. It has outlines. It kind of helps you understand, clarify the text. Like we're doing a little bit like we're doing here. I mean, I'm not going to put I have graphs that I can't really put up here, and I don't. I should buy it. Okay, this is where I need the money. It'd be nice, and it's available. So that's how you can help. if you want to help another way, you can send the money through YouTube. They have you can find me. I'm available online. You can know where I am. You can send it by Gmail. Okay, I understand. That's enough of the begging. Okay. Um, oh, please, master, some porridge, please. Um, on that, we're at the end. I hope you all have a good day, and we'll see us next time when we get chapter 7 of book 4, which kind of gives us a discussion about the regimes not mentioned yet. 7, 8 kind of do that. Well, we'll stop here. Take care and have a good day. Bye bye.